Wholesaling. My name is Stephen Jones. I have met half of you. I hope to meet the other half really soon through this presentation. Quick note at the back of the room, Jason Lang from Wholesaler's office was kind enough to drop off some refreshments there, so help yourself at the back of the room. I have had quite a bit of experience with assignments and wholesaling, and I thought it was best because I was fielding a lot of calls from other agents as we were going through different cycles within our market, exactly about wholesaling and what is assignments. So for the purpose of today, we're going to talk about them both and how they come about. But I wanted to jump right into kind of introducing the panel here. Jason from Wholesaler, do you have to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. As Stephen said, my name's Jason Lane. I've worked with Wholesaler for since about 2018. I did my summering there as well as my articling. I've been a lawyer since 2020, and I work exclusively in the real estate department, primarily with residential real estate. We're quite a high volume practice, so we do end up seeing a lot of assignment deals come through as well. So I'm happy to be here today to talk about, just go over the assignment agreement as well as take a look at some of the issues that we often see and how we can avoid those issues.
Okay, thank you. Diana, our mortgage specialist.
So I'm Diana Iskander. I'm a mortgage broker here in Durham region. I've been working as a mortgage advisor and a mortgage broker for about the past 18 years. I've funded about $500 million single-handedly in my career on my own. I've also had personal experience doing an assignment. I think actually Jason helped me with it, and for my clients as well.
And we also have Don and Rick Lewis. These are the Lewis brothers. They're our wholesalers. Wholesalers used to be the enemy of realtors. We're going to talk you through this right now of how things have changed, and I'll tell you their cards.
So I'm Rick Lewis, Don Lewis, and essentially we've been doing this for about 5 years, finding deals privately off market. We're going to go through some stuff for you guys and show you what that client looks like and how the whole transaction happens.
And we deal with a very small portion of the market as well. So,
okay, awesome. Well, we can jump right into Jason. If you could get Jason's presentation going, and we'll learn about the assignment process.
Yeah, for sure. And to confirm, Zoom can hear, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
There? Okay. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about assignments. Just one sec. There, so Zoom can see that now.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Yeah. So I'm going to go over today the assignment agreement and just things to note there. I do want you to pay close attention to this picture because it is the only picture in the presentation. And the rest is going to be words. So we can go to the next slide. And I actually, the next slide was just my introduction. So I already spoke to that, and my contact information will be at the end, and then the documentation will be provided with as well. So we can go to the next slide. And I thought it would just be good to quickly go over exactly what we're doing when we enter into an assignment. So when you have, when you're looking to do an assignment, of course, you have an original buyer who's already agreed to buy a property from a vendor or a seller. And then you have the assignee who's looking to take over that contract. They're not buying directly the property from the assignor who is the original buyer. They are buying the right to buy the property. So you're selling basically the contract. So that's important to understand from the beginning. So that, as we're walking through, we know exactly what's happening. Yeah, these have gained a lot of popularity in the last number of years in Canada. We can go to the next slide. And so first, I just wanted to briefly go over the assignment agreement. So for those that are here today, there is a copy of these in front of you as well. It might be a little bit hard to see from the back there, but it is the standard Form 145 assignment agreement. A lot of this form is going to be much the same as what you enter into a Form 100 when you do an agreement of purchase and sale, but there are some important differences. So the first one here, you'll see underlined in red when we're describing the property. Again, this is just making clear that we are selling the assigner's interest in the real property, not the real property itself. And then this is again filled out much the same way you would do Form 100. The other difference, just one back there, just go back one more, just real quick. The purchase price here at the bottom, this is described a little bit later, but when you're entering in the purchase price on the assignment agreement, you are entering in the purchase price of the original agreement plus the assignment fee. So this is ultimately what the assignor is going to be receiving in total, or in combination with the original amount. We'll look at that a little more in depth in a moment, but we can go to the next slide. Yeah, this is the second half of the first page, where again, it just describes what I just mentioned, where the purchase price is a combination of the assignment fee and the original purchase price. The irrevocability section, that's the same as on a Form 100, just giving the offer, a timeline. We can go to the next slide there. So these are the most unique, I would say, provisions that are not found in a Form 100. This is the first bit of the second page on your Form 145. And this is what describes the obligations of in the framework of the assignment. So number 2 there is just defining that the assigner is agreeing to assign to the assignee all the rights, title, and interest in, under, and to the agreement of purchase and sale. So they are assigning the right to buy the property, and they are assigning essentially the obligations of that contract. So of course, the person that's buying this contract is now going to fulfill the contract. The assignee, that's what they're covenanting to do, is to perform everything required in order to complete that contract. Meanwhile, the assignor is undertaking and covenanting that they do actually, in fact, have this right to sell this contract. I'll talk a little more about this after, but in most ORIA form agreements, so when you're dealing with a resale property, there's no prohibition on assigning unless it's been explicitly stated in the agreement. So unless there's something specific about it in Schedule A, they do have the right to assign the contract. This is different for new builds. Again, I'll talk a little more about that after. And they're also just undertaking to not enter into any further amendments to the agreement. They're not going to change the agreement from when it was assigned. They're really not to do that. We can go to the next slide there. This is largely the same as what's on Form 100. The notice section just lays out how notice is to be provided either by the brokerage or by the client or the lawyer. The HST section, again, we will talk about this a little bit more after. It is important to mention whether HST is going to be included in or in addition to. This is especially important if you're dealing with a new build property, because assignment fees, so the profit that the assigner makes, is taxable on a new build property. So it needs to be made very clear who is going to pay that, whether it's going to be the assignor or the assigned. Future users just representing that warranting any different use of the property other than residential. This inspection section, I just want to point out here that it's clear that this form was made in contemplation of a new build agreement, because you'll see in this that it says for the property to be constructed. So it acknowledges that they've had the opportunity to inspect the property and for the property to be constructed. That's, I mean, it's not a big issue. You can still use this form, of course, for non-new build, but for anybody that's really particular, it is in there. So if you want to be particular about it, you could amend that. The Planning Act, this is the same. This just acknowledges that there's not going to be a planning act. The assignment can't occur with a Planning Act violation. This is mostly for the lawyers, but what this is referring to is if someone owns 2 pieces of property next to each other and they don't have consent to sell one of the other properties, they can't actually convey it. So this is just saying basically that this can't occur unless that problem is solved. So the next page here, this is all exactly the same as actually what's in your Form 100. So I'm not going to speak specifically about that, but of course, if you're going through any of this and you have any questions that you're unsure about something, you're always welcome to reach out to myself about that or anyone from my team. But for the sake of time, we can skip through that since it's the same. The things that are different, this is now, I believe, on page 3. And here you're specifically at the top, the approval of the agreement. This again is specific to new builds, generally speaking, because when there's a new build contract, there's going to be consent required from the builder. This is acknowledging that that consent needs to be obtained. And if it's not, if the seller doesn't consent to the transaction, effectively the assignment is null and void. This is both parties agreeing that they are going to undertake to do everything they can to make this assignment work. So again, the most common situation where this would be important is when there is a consent agreement and a new build is ultimately going to require both the assigner and assignee to sign. This is basically stating that the assignee can't just say, well, I'm not signing that because I want out of the deal. They have an undertaking to cooperate with getting this transaction completed. And finally, a really important thing to note, which I do talk about later, is that if the seller, so the vendor, if the original vendor defaults, if they cannot close or do not close for any reason, the deal is effectively dead and the funds need to be returned to the assignee. So all the deposits and everything that were paid. This becomes, it's going to be more about what we talk later. This becomes very important because, of course, if there's already been commission released or deposits released and someone has, the assigner has gone and bought a new home, they are, and this seller defaults, they do have to pay those funds back. So that's an important thing to consider when you're structuring when things are going to be paid, which we will talk about a little bit more. So we can go over that. And so, yeah, so just to go over what I'm going to go through in a little more detail about the assignments. There's just some important things where I commonly, see issues, discrepancies with the contracts that I see. So the list here is, just making sure who is responsible for what. Is it the assigner or the assignee? Which one is going to be completing the various steps? When are the fees payable? So when is the deposit payable? When is the final amount payable? Is it be released to the assigner prior to completion? When is the deal actually complete? What's provisions? So what are some provisions you can enter into the contract to make things more clear or to give intention to what your client is looking for? Is HST payable on assignment fees? Again, this is largely related to new builds, but is important. And then just how much land transfer tax is payable. These are common questions and issues. So we can go to the next slide. And going through the contract, I already kind of went through this, but just looking at who is responsible, as we mentioned before, the assigner is transferring their rights under the contract. The assignor through the entire transaction does remain liable for the vendor. There's no contract between the original vendor and the assignee. So the assignee, the person who agreed to buy the contract, if they default, the assignor is still responsible to close the transaction. And if they breach, if they can't close, and there's an extension fees, et cetera, they are responsible for those fees. The assignee, so the person buying the contract, they have indemnified the assigner for these costs. So the way that looks is the vendor is going to charge the assigner for the costs, and now the assigner would have to turn around and seek those costs from the assignee. While there is this indemnity, if you have an assignee that just couldn't close, they likely have an issue with financing most of the time. It may be difficult to recover from them. So this is something that's important for assigners to be aware of. And then specifically with regards to assignment fees, of course, the large reason why people will enter assignments is because the property they agreed to purchase is now worth more. They don't want to take ownership. They want to make profit on it. This is what the assignment fee is in this instance. So it's profit on the transaction. And as I mentioned before, it's very important to make clear when this is payable. And it needs to be specified because by default, the beginning of Schedule A, which we can actually go to the next page here, or next slide. On Schedule A, so on Form 145 on the default form, there is this provision that shows right here, which by default essentially states that any funds paid are to be held in trust until just prior to the final completion, so the final closing, final transaction. So we can go to the next slide just to read what that clause says. So yes, specifically it says it's to be paid to the assigner solicitor prior to the completion of the original agreement of purchase and sale, and it's to be held in trust until the completion of the agreement of purchase and sale. So of course, there may be instances where you want to do something other than that. And when that happens, I often see this provision crossed out. You can cross it out if you have a very specific way you want to do something. However, it would be my recommendation to leave it because it's very important that the contract is always clear that the assignee cannot take title to the property before the assignor is paid. You don't want to have a situation where the assignee can read into the contract that they can take title and then pay after, because you don't want them to have ownership of the property before they pay. This clause makes that clear. And you can always add in something that does not agree with this clause. Whatever you add in will supersede this clause. So anything additional to these types of contracts, section 20 of the assignment agreement states that what you write in will override this to the extent that there's a conflict. So in saying that, you don't absolutely have to cross it out if you're doing something different. So we can go to the next slide there. And yeah, so from the perspective of, of course, you've got a client that you're either acting for the assigner or the assignee. They're going to both have different interests, and they're going to want these fees to be paid at different times. Let's say the assigner, they're going to want to, of course, have the funds paid as soon as possible. Often they'll want them shortly after acceptance of the assignment or in a new build right after we receive consent. And if it's possible or feasible, you can certainly set that up. But as I mentioned, if there is a default by the seller in the end, those fees will need to be paid back to the assignee. The difficulty typically with having the fees paid right up front is that, most assignees are going to need to obtain financing, and they're not going to be able to get financing until the final closing. So their mortgage isn't going to advance them the funds until final closing, so they don't physically have a way to pay you all of the fee and the deposits up front. And that's why, of course, an assignee wants it all paid at the end. The middle ground, and what I would typically suggest, is to have a setup where there's going to be a deposit paid. So a deposit for the assignment agreement to be paid, and that's going to be paid upfront. And typically, if the client is agreeable, it's going to be the most straightforward, simply have the assignment fee be paid on closing. If you're dealing with a new build, your client, your assigner client, or the person that originally bought, they're going to have already paid deposits, which we're going to look at a little more in a second. They're going to have already paid deposits to the builder. If possible, I would also advise that these deposits be paid at the time of consent or something like that ahead of time, because the buyer, like the assignee, they should probably have contemplated those amounts of deposits anyway, and they should be able to pay them as a down payment. And again, we'll look at that a little more of how that looks on a new build. And so for that slide, that's good. We can go to the next slide there. And so Schedule B of the assignment agreement, this is where there's going to be a breakdown of how the funds are to be paid. And this is probably where I see the most issues in assignment agreements. Ultimately, they're generally not issues that actually create an issue with closing, but they create confusion amongst the agents and the lawyers as to when the fees are going to be paid, how much is to be paid at what time, etc. We can go to the next slide where I've actually pulled in Schedule B. Again, this might be a little difficult to see, but it is part of the assignment agreement. It should be page 6. And so this, I've just put in an example for an agreement. And in this agreement, the original agreement of purchase and sale, so the original sale, the sale price on this agreement was $900,000. So that goes into number 2, purchase price of original agreement of purchase and sale as indicated in Schedule C. You will always attach the original agreement and all of its amendments to your assignment agreement as a Schedule C. So that's what this is referring to here. The first number here is the total amount being paid for this assignment agreement. So this is the amount of the original agreement of purchase and sale plus whatever assignment fee there is. So in this instance, I have $1 million here. The original agreement was $900,000. That means this deal has an assignment fee of $100,000. Okay, so the assignee is paying $100,000 to the assignor to take over this contract. Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking for So let's go back to this. So Mr. Smith bought a house from the builder for $900,000. Can you hear me? But Mr. Smith bought a house from the builder, Small Jeffrey Homes, for $900,000. He provided a deposit of $50,000. So on closing, $852. However, because this is a assignment sale, $1 million is due. And $100,000 of that is on is an assignment fee. Right?
Yes, it happens into, it doesn't all go to the builder. A portion of it goes, of course, to the assignor and a portion to the builder. So
How come we don't see that in this?
well, you will. So the contract to the builder, and this can be entered in for this can be for a builder deal, or it can be for a resale as well. It would be the same. Yeah, that's no problem. Yeah. So the builder agreed to sell the property for $900,000. The deposits paid by the assigner to the seller, so they is $50,000. So they've already paid the builder $50,000. Correct. From the perspective of the assignee, in order to complete both the assignment and the original transaction, they are going to need to pay $1 million. That's the total amount for these transactions.
The assignee or the assignor?
The assignee, because they're taking over the transaction. So what they're going to do is they're going to pay this $50,000 that's already been paid to the builder. They're going to pay this $50,000 to the assignor because that's already been paid. That's already been accounted for from the builder. And the one thing to always remember is the builder or the seller, they don't care about the assignment ultimately. It has nothing to do with them really. And so from their perspective, they've been paid the $50,000 already. That's going to be on their adjustments. But from the assignor's perspective, they need to be reimbursed for the fact that they already paid this. That's where it's going to be stipulated that they're paid this back. Then we can describe when that's going to be paid. That can be up to you when that's going to be paid. And then what we have here, and this is where the most confusion generally lies, is the payment by the assignee to the assignor for this assignment agreement. And here you'll see that we have $150,000. The reason for this is the assignee is going to pay the $100,000 assignment fee, and they're going to pay the $50,000 deposit. So they have to pay $150,000 for this assignment. In this example also, page 1 of the assignment would have had $25,000. This is a deposit that the assignee has already paid to the assignor for this transaction. So we're taking into account the fact that the assignor already has $25,000 of this $150,000. And so the balance of payments after this deposit is paid, the balance of payment due for this assignment is $125,000. And that is what needs to be paid to the assignor or the assignor's lawyer before the assignee can close on the original agreement of purchase and sale. Okay. And there will be a further question period at the end, but because, yeah, we're dealing with numbers here and it's hard to keep them all in line. Is there any other specific questions right now about this slide specifically that anyone had there? Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. HST on the assignment fee. Is that better?
I think so.
Oh. I'll try and talk a little louder maybe. The resale, when you're reselling a property, so residential property, there's no HST payable. And so on an assignment fee, there's similarly going to be no HST fee payable. However, when you're dealing with a new build property, the assignment fee, so in our previous example, the $100,000 that the assignor is going to receive, this is profit and it is taxable. And specifically as of May 7th of this year, it is taxable regardless. Before it was an evaluation of whether you were considered to be a builder or the reason you were selling it, it's just taxable now. So that $100,000 they have to pay tax on. So it's very important to determine who is going to pay that tax, whether it be the assignor or the assignee. That's where in section 6, you determine whether it's in addition to or together with. And the one other very important thing here when you're dealing with new builds is the $50,000 deposit in our previous example. It's not taxable, but to ensure that it is not taxable, you need to include some provision in the agreement that a portion of the profits it was to cover a deposit. So the worksheet that the government has provided requires that that be inserted. I've given a separate Word document to Stephen that he can certainly share with everyone. I've put some clauses. This one, the clause that you can use for this is included there as well. It's a Word document, so you can pull right from that. So you'll be able to have that clause, but that is important as the government's suggesting that it needs to be there. Justin.
Yeah. So if you were assigning as the first assigned buyer, you also lose your HST.
That's
HST on the older price plus profits.
you don't. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a second, but you don't pay the total amount of HST. You pay the rebate essentially. So you'll pay on most transactions. It's going to be $24,000, and you have to make the application after. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about that. But to be clear, you're not paying HST on the total million. You're paying HST on the 100,000 as the assigner because this is profit that's not been accounted for as of yet. Because a new build purchase price, so that purchase price of 900,000, the builder has already taken into account HST. They've already included it in there.
Quite often for our clients,
yeah.
we will just make it that much clearer. If you're looking for 100,000, that it's the 100K inclusive of it, and the 100K inclusive of it. So you get like whatever it is, 80, so,
And it helps on my end too.
yeah.
Yeah, which, yeah, again, I'll talk about it. I do have some HST rebate slides. We'll go into a little more detail in a second. Yeah. Oh, no, I think you're good there. Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. And yeah, we already looked at this clause, and this is where, yeah, you can either include it or require it to be in addition to. Again, the one thing that you'll want to be advising on or get your client to get advice on is with regards to whether they like getting an HST number. I can't specifically advise on that or something like that, or to arrange to pay that HST. We can go to the next slide there. And this is where I am going to talk specifically about new build deals. As you know, up until this point, most everything's been a consideration that you would make for either transaction. The new builds, there's just a little bit more to consider, as Justin brought up. There's the HST rebate to consider, and there's also consent from the builder that needs to be considered. So you can go to the next slide.
You're doing it yourself. You have to be super clear because the builder's like, sure, assignment's no problem. Free, $5,000 is what we're going to charge you. But when you read it, it says, when you agree upon, right? If the builder still has inventory, it's highly unlikely they're going to agree upon this. If they're working on another phase nearby, AKA, can you be a competitor to the builder? They're gonna not to go through this. You have to be very careful on when you can assign it. Sometimes the smooth talking, I will just say, yeah, you can have an assignment fee, but when you look at it, you should be agreed upon. So you have to be super careful about that. Well, when during part of negotiation, you would remove that part, you strike it out, right? Or put at least put the clause in the client's favor. Okay.
Yeah, what I would typically recommend there is that the agreement be conditional upon consent. And when you obtain consent from a builder, the builder will actually provide a consent agreement that will need to be signed by both the assignee and assignor and the builder. And so it's basically conditional until that agreement is fully executed. And that way you're, like you've both agreed you're going to do an assignment, but it's conditional upon making sure that consent is present, because that is required to complete the assignment. Is Zoom still okay.
We're here.
Okay. Okay, and yeah, so as we were just saying, there is consent required. So because when you enter into a new build agreement, you're not using the standard ORIA form. They have all builders have their own agreement, and in every single one of them, I would say, or virtually every single one of them, you're going to require the consent of the builder to assign, and it probably is going to be a large fee involved with granting that. And do also be careful. A lot of the times they will specify their assignment fee, and they'll still be like $2,000 to $20,000, and they will not necessarily make clear that you're going to pay their legals as well. So your client is going to have to pay their legal fees, which generally are $1,000, but I have seen like $3,000 or $4,000, which is ridiculous. But nevertheless, they kind of have all the power in that situation. So if you are asking for an original purchaser of an assignment or of a new build, one really quick thing is you can always ask for an amendment for the assignment clause to remove the fee. So basically, it's still required that there's be consent, but they remove their assignment fee. Some builders will be amenable to reducing or removing that fee, so that when your client goes to assign, should they wish, they're not paying this large fee. They'll still most often make you pay the royalty. So, and so, yes, within the agreement, it's very important to make clear who is paying those fees. Usually it is the assigner, and by default in the agreement, it is the assigner. But if you're wanting to be the assignee, you just need to specify that. Okay. Another important thing with consent is oftentimes builders, what they will do is they will say, sure, we'll consent, but we're removing all caps, all incentives, etc. So if when you were negotiating with the builder, they said that development charges were capped at $2,000, they may remove this, and development charges can be $20,000 to $30,000. That's pretty common. They may also, if they've been delayed and there's late closing compensation payable, they will often require that that be waived. So the assignee will not be receiving the delayed closing compensation that the assigner would have been entitled to. That is also somewhat common. So when you're asking for again, it's very important that it be conditional on a review of the consent agreement. So as I was saying before, what's going to happen is you ask the builder for a consent, the assigner goes and does that. They're going to provide a consent agreement, which is going to have these types of terms in them. That agreement can be made conditional upon review by the assignee's lawyer. And if they don't like the consent terms, you can walk from the deal. On the other side, if you're the assignor, you can add a clause stating that the assignee agrees to sign the consent regardless of whether these types of incentives are removed. So basically they're saying we're going to sign this consent no matter what the builder states. So you can do that as well when you're asking for the assignor. We can go to the next slide. So now talking about the HST rebate, as we were talking about a little bit before, as I was saying, when you have a new build, the HST is already calculated in the pricing. And the builder has done this with the expectation that the buyer is going to assign to them the HST rebate. The HST rebate is on any property over $450,000, it's going to be $24,000. And there's a sliding scale for the federal portion, so anywhere between 350 and 450, it might be a little bit more, but most of the time we're dealing with properties now that are over 450 anyway. It's going to be 24K. They have the discretion to require a buyer to pay this on closing. So they have basically the discretion to charge an extra $24,000 on top of the purchase price on closing and require that that buyer apply for this rebate themselves. And we can go to the next slide. When you're doing an assignment, they will almost always in the recent past do this. So as part of the consent, they will make clear that the assignee is not eligible or that will not be afforded the HST rebate. So the assignee most of the time will need to pay this extra $24,000. And because of that, it's important to note that when you're dealing with a lender, they're not going to consider this to be a part of the purchase price. The purchase price is the $900,000, it's not $924,000. So if you're expecting to get financing for this extra $24K, you may be in trouble. So it's very important to, again, confirm whether that's going to be afforded to you, and if it's not, whether you can finance it. And we can go to the next slide.
The rebate form is I think it's 1 or 2 page federal form that is not hard to complete, and usually do see the reimbursement within 4 weeks.
Yeah, and exactly. And so, you know, it's not an issue to complete after the fact, but you need to have the funds to close, and then it's not too, your clients can always get the advice of accountant or whatnot if they're worried about completing the form as well. But that's a good point, is that you do get it pretty quickly after. So yeah, from the perspective of the assignee, again, you can make it conditional upon written confirmation from the builder that they will afford the HST rebate should the assignee be eligible. To be eligible, you need to intend to occupy the property as a principal residence. So if, for example, they're buying it intending to rent, regardless of whether the builder consents, they're not going to get the rebate. There is a landlord rebate that you can apply for after the fact as well. So there is rebates that they can apply for, but they will not get it on closing if they're going to be renting the property. Acting for the assignor, it's important to make clear who is paying the HST rebate or any taxes payable to the original vendor. So you can put in a clause, again, it's in that clause sheet, it's what you can use. Just making sure and making clear that the assignee is the one responsible for the rebate. We can go to the next slide there. This is not as often a question, but just a question on when land transfer tax is payable and how much. It's payable on final closing. So it is not at any point payable when the assignor receives their fee. It is only payable on the final closing, final transaction. But it is payable on the total amount of consideration paid to obtain this property. So in our previous example, it's payable on the $1 million, not the 900,000. So for a property in Oshawa, on on 900,000, it would be about 14,500 for land transfer tax. It's going to go up to about 16,500 because of the assignment. And so you're getting about a $2,000 difference. In Toronto, that of course, the difference is going to double essentially because you're paying the Toronto portion as well. So just something to keep in mind if clients are asking about land transfer tax. And the last, no, you're good there. Yeah. The last slide specifically is where I talked about before, but it's very important. If the seller defaults, Section 17 of the agreement states that the assignment is null and void, the funds are to be returned to the assignee. The assignor is not liable for any expenses, losses, or damages incurred by the assignee. The assignor can commence legal proceedings against the seller. So if we get into a scenario where the seller defaulted, the market has crashed, they would now need to buy a property, or rather the market has gone up, they need to buy a property that's $400,000 more for something comparable. The assignor can sue the seller, but the assignee is essentially, there's no one the assignee can sue, basically. So your assignee client is out of luck. They have to go pay more for a property because they don't have a contract with the seller. They have, and the assigner has no liability for this loss because it was a default by the seller. So another thing just to keep in mind when acting for an assignee. And I believe that was the extent of what I specifically thought was important to bring up about assignments. Of course, there's lots more that could be talked about, but those are, you know, common issues and questions that I see in my practice. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has. And again, if you come up with questions that you don't think of right now, you can always reach out to me or anyone on my team with further questions.
I do have a couple of comments and a couple of questions of my own.
Yeah.
I'll start with the comments. So if you're representing the assignor, so somebody, we're talking about a new build here, okay? You want to have it looking in the best interest of your assignor and to make it the most attractive to the assignee. So one of the biggest issues they have is that if mutually agreed upon, you want the ability to get rid of that so that you can assign it. Another big issue we have is, especially with condominium that we assign with interim occupants, okay? Once that person closes on it, so you're working for maybe the assignee on one side, once you get interim occupancy of that, you don't own it, okay? The ownership's gonna happen later after it's been registered, and quite often, if you don't own it, you can't rent it. Okay, so you may think this is a great idea, you're picking up this assignment, for you to turn it into an investment property. What if it takes up to a year to get registered and you cannot rent these things? You go to put on MLS, they'll call you and say, take it down immediately. These are all things that you can put into the original agreement with the builder. So the right to rent during interim occupancy and the get rid of the mutually agreed upon that the assignment is going to take place. So you really have to, when you're working with these people before they start the assignment and during, it's definitely a conversation you need to have with Jason, other than just kind of what was learned today. You got to make sure your client's fully protected.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, when you're making the agreement conditional, so you can make that assignment agreement conditional on solicitor review. We can also, and what that means is, of course, the original agreement is going to be attached to that assignment. And so within that, you can be reviewing the original agreement as well to give you specifics or things to note on the original agreement, as a new build agreement is going to be quite lengthy. If you have that condition there, we would be taking a look at the assignment as well as the new build agreement to make clear what the rights are surrounding an assignment if you're unsure.
And the original APS, the Form 100, becomes a schedule in essence to the Form 145. So when you have the assignee saying, can I have revisits? No, it's you're taking that contract as is. So maybe that contract said financing condition, home inspection condition, but it's been fulfilled by the assignor. And now it's coming to the assignee, and they may want financing condition, home inspection, couple revisits. That they're not allowed that unless you try to renegotiate that after. But you're just taking the existing contract and what it says in it. So just because it had conditions, those conditions have been expired, fulfilled, you no longer have that. So keep that in mind, that you're bound by the original condition. That's all you're buying is that original document. Okay. Question for you. Can the seller refuse the buyer to assign?
Not if it's not in the contract. So the original, the Form 100, by default, it is not, there's no restriction on assigning. So if they have not specified, they cannot refuse to allow assignment.
Perfect, because for what I do is we write and or assign. Stephen Jones and or assign to give me that opportunity. So
yeah, and it would be my, like if you're entering into a Form 100 with the anticipation of assigning it, it would be my suggestion that you make clear in the schedule that this specifically can be assigned at any time, just so that you don't have a lawyer on the other side trying to argue that you can't. You can, but without specific wording, it just gives them that extra argument that's going to waste time. So if it's something to be contemplated, I would put it in the original, but it does not have to be there. You do have the legal right to assign it because it's not specifically prohibited in the contract or 100.
if the assignee defaults, does the assignor have to close on the property?
Yes.
Is that covered? Okay, okay, thank you.
Yeah, they have to close, and if they can't close, they have to negotiate an extension. And then if they still can't close, the seller, the original vendor, could sue the assignor for all of their damages.
Could you have something in the schedule in the assignment contract that states that they're now not liable for that, all on the assignee?
No, because the contract is not with the original seller. So what you can have in the assignment is you can have a clause, it's basically already stating that the assignee indemnifies you against any damages, but then you're relying on an indemnity. The only way that you could have them be directly liable, the assignee, is you would have to get an amendment done rather than an assignment. So the original seller would have to sign off on some form of amendment or agreement stating that, and that would be what's called ovation. So they would now be entering into a contract with the seller as opposed to an assignment.
So even with profits, you may buy a place for 900,000, it's worth $1 million. The client's super excited. They come to you and say, "Can you help me assign this? I want to make some money." When it comes right down to it, you have your fee, your real estate fee, and then you have who it could be going to. They may be represented, so there could be the 5% total fee. And then of those profits, there's HST, not capping the charges that the builder can have, and then your assignment fee, there's really nothing left. So you just have to be careful of their expectations for you to actually help them out in that situation. So questions?
So if the assigned work is accountable for the $900,000 portion of the land transfer, and then the assignee is accountable for the land transfer on the left.
No, the assignee would be responsible to pay all of the land transfer tax.
Is that written in the contractor and the?
Well, it's the land is being transferred to them, so land transfer tax is payable when you obtain title to a property. So as part of the closing documents to be put on title to that property, you're recording the consideration that you paid. And so the assignee, they paid $1 million to get title to this property. And so they are the ones that owe the land transfer tax. The only instance in which the assigner would pay, of course, is if the assignee defaulted and they had to close because they're the ones taking title. It's whoever takes the title is who pays the land transfer tax, essentially.
Anybody else?
You mentioned the landlord rebate for HST, so that's, I'm buying a condo to be built. It's not gonna be my residence, I intend on renting it out, I have to pay 24,000 cash. But you said there is a way to get it back for the landlord.
Yes, so you're correct in that if you represented to the builder that you were going to be renting, so assignment or no, like even if you're just a regular buyer, if you represent you're going to be renting, they're going to charge that on their statement of adjustments. So there's going to be an extra 24K there. And then there are landlord rebates. That's more of a tax question. So it's not something I specifically apply for, so I don't know the specific details, but there is a rebate for that as well. And I believe it is for the same amount, but I'm not 100% certain.
And I think it's after a full year only. Then you can apply for it.
Yeah, there might be a little more delay. It's not as quick as
It's
getting
not
the,
like with, regular principal residence, and you can apply the day you get title. If you're a landlord, you have to wait the full year, I believe it's not.
I've been through this myself.
Okay.
But I think if you have a year tenant contract.
Right. Oh.
yeah, you
Okay.
provide one evidence there. Okay.
So maybe the intent to hang
Yeah.
on to it for a year might be what it is, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's not right away. Yeah.
Again, any questions to your comment? Key points, guys, solicitor approval, super key in this, it's very dynamic, just so your clients are looked after, whether you're having them negotiate into a new contract or even having it, negotiate into something that's already there for clarification between the assignee and assignor, okay? Solicitor approval, so are we good with that, Suzanne?
For real estate side, self-insurance, so if you're doing an assignee agreement, you use form 320 for the commission.
They have a variety of forms to get paid commission. That's not the one that I've used in the past. And I'll get to you on the one that I've used. I think it was just a single pager and it was just payment. And nothing that is confusing, but it would be like flat rate. I'd be like 10,000 or 15,000 depending on the deal.
So what you get, once you
And that would be paid by
take into consideration of the.
no, on my service. Sometimes that's a 100K lift. That is a good lift. They happen, but rare. There's also 5K lifts, 10K lifts. So you can't charge.
Okay, so what is it the builder will charge for an assignment?
Yeah.
25, 500, 10 grand. Sorry,
Yeah.
2,500, 5,000, 10 grand.
Yeah,
Or free
those,
if you negotiate.
Yeah.
Depends how much he wants to move the product.
those figures are all not uncommon. It varies quite significantly, but yeah, I've seen, other than negotiating it for free, I've seen as little as 1,000, as much as 20,000.
It would probably be lower. Yeah. But again, get the solicitor approval to get all of those key clauses and protect yourself.
So since we're having this review for our buyer or assignee by solicitor, this is like a status review. How long do you guys want additional period for legal review?
So I mean, 2 business days is fine, preferably more, but 2 business days would give us the time. It depends where, of course, like I understand your negotiation, it might not want a longer condition. 5 business days would be ideal. But 2 is certainly doable pretty much at any point. That's, yeah, like I said, we have lots of staff that are able to take that on. So we have lots of people that could review that for you.
Can I
Okay.
jump in?
Please.
When you're asking about the conditional period on the assignments, I don't need more, and sometimes, especially the builder ones, it's more than 5 days, because what happens is the lender will want to approve the application, and they can't see that the application or that the application you have it signed and been approved by the builder, and then the builder doesn't want to sign off on it until they see the approval from the bank. Like, it happens. It's pretty ridiculous. So sometimes it is a lot of back and forth. So for us, it has to be 5 days, especially with the builder, because you have to wait for them to sign off. It does take a while. Wait a minute. Why would you build it? It's not a 5,000 assignment. It's a assignment for you. It's pretty assignment.
So there's
The builders need to sign off.
the builder running the original vendor. This is specific to new builds within your form. So for resale. So if you're the original vendor is a regular individual, then you don't need their consent. Every new build agreement, which is not on a mortgage form, is going to require consent from the builder.
For the 80-page documents.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Jason, so much. We'll do a little panel questions at the end for final. So we found out how to do it and how to fund it. Because quite often, you put 20% down on investment properties. Most lenders don't like that. So that's only 5K, big deal. If it's 100K, 200K, an agent in our office do a 400K profit on her assignment. Where are those funds coming from? Which brings us to Diana.
Okay, so I think we can skip over this slide and the next slide, because the next slide is just a little intro, so we did go over that. So just an overview for us, and just some of the terminology that I use, and just some specifics that will apply to all the transactions and all the options that I'm going to tell you guys about. So for us, the difference, the new purchase price and the original purchase price, we call it the lift. We don't like to call it the assignment fee, just because the lenders don't want to pay a fee to somebody else. So, oh, sorry, can we just, no, that's okay. Every lender has different policies. Some will lend on the new purchase price. Some will just do it based on the original value, whichever is less sometimes. So we have to keep in mind all the options that I'm going to go over with you guys are very case per case basis. Every deal looks a little bit different. It depends on the strength of the client and their whole portfolio and what that looks like. So just bear that in mind. These are just some general options that I would offer to somebody who is looking to get into an assignment agreement. One thing that's super important for us on the lending side is these are arm's length transactions. They will be asking us, how did the assignor and the assignee come into contact with each other? Do they have a personal relationship? Are they related? If we say you're related or you have a personal relationship, right off the bat, the bank is not going to finance that lift, and you have to be responsible for it yourself. So if a realtor connected you, even if a friend connected you, but you don't have that personal relationship, that's okay. So that is a big thing that we have to take a look at, is that it's an arm's length transaction. Okay, and then we're going to go over some of the solutions. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible because it doesn't need to be overly complicated on my end. So options for financing and assignment. So the most ideal is we're going to go with a chartered bank or a monoline bank mortgage. Okay, so those are your CIBCs, your Scotia banks, First National, Manulife. We're talking A lenders, A rates, no fees, nothing too crazy going on there. Then we've got option 2. So we're looking at B lenders or private mortgages to fund the whole amount. So up to 80% of the purchase price. Third option, we've got a stacked mortgage. So a mortgage in first position and then with a second behind it to try to finance that lift. The whole goal is for us is to have our clients come out with at least the least amount of money out of pocket to make sure that they can come up with their down payment and then also be able to finance the lift. And then the last option is a first mortgage plus a cash injection for the assignment lift portion. So next slide. Okay, so this would be the easiest and most ideal. Most builder assignments, as long as the client qualifies, would be able to qualify under this chartered bank and the monoline lenders. They don't really, the lenders don't look too closely at the amounts of the lift with regards to assigning builder, especially if they were bought 3-4 years ago and we're looking at $400,000 lifts. Like, that's not abnormal, especially in the market that we've had in the past. So it's nothing that they won't consider. So again, this is for this is the most ideal situation. So you can go to those 5% down. That's with a $500,000 purchase. So the mortgage insurers will also finance the lift portion as long as it appraises out. Okay, and then 10% down payment for any amount of purchase price over 500. So I've just put in an example here. I've tried to use the same example for all the different options, just so we're comparing apples to apples. So the example here is the $650,000 purchase price is 150 above the 500,000. 5% of 500,000 is 25 plus 10% of 150 is 15,000. So the minimum down payment would be 650. The minimum down payment is 40,000 on a 650 purchase, and that's what you would have to come up with in the most ideal of situations. Okay, this is your principal residence. We're going with a straight A lender. That's your minimum down payment. Roger?
Purchase price.
Yeah.
That's the assignment price.
Yes, that is the assignment price. Yeah.
Make assumption the purchase price was 700, the assignment price would be 80.
Yeah, again, I'm just showing you what the down payment I'm talking about when I say 500,000, like 5% of the first 500 and then 10% after, okay? And then the loan to value, so maximum loan to value is 95%. That is determined by the purchase price or the appraised value. Again, this is assuming that they will finance the lift. So here's my example here, 800,000. The down payment would be 55,000. The total mortgage with a premium is 774,800. So again, this is an example of an $800,000 purchase with the assignment price. That's your minimum down payment, and then that's your total mortgage amount. Okay, next slide. Okay, B lender or private mortgage. So there are also B lenders out there that will finance the full amount. Okay, so the full assignment price. They'll go up to 80% of the purchase price. So B lenders and private mortgages do not deal with insured files. So that's anything less than 20% down. They don't work in that world. So up to 80% of the purchase price, again, loan to value will be determined by the purchase price or the appraisal value, whichever is lower, okay? Usually 2 to 5% of fees are charged on top of that of the mortgage amount. And there's also a premium on the rate. So here, again, if I can find a lender for a specific client that will finance the lift, but we do have to go with 20% down, just because that's what the client qualified for. Purchase price of 800,000, coming in with a down payment of 160, and then their mortgage amount is 640. Okay, next one. So
one quick question.
Yeah.
There are the fees financeable.
No.
So you gotta pay those up front.
Yeah. Well, in some circumstances, because if the client is coming in with more than 20% down, then they'll do like,
Sure. Yeah.
right?
I just
Yeah.
so
they'll
that they know,
just-
like those fees are not.
Yeah,
they have to
those
come up with
fees
those
are
fees.
part of your closing costs, just like the land transfer tax or the HST. That is not something that the lenders will mortgage. So a stacked mortgage, so first with a second in behind it. So this is if we've gone with option A and option B, and I cannot find anyone to agree to it. Again, it could be just the property itself or the clients or a combination of both, or even just the amount of the lift is too high and the lenders don't feel comfortable with that. So we have to go in with a first or a second. Major banks, we cannot close with a second mortgage in position on closing date. So we would have to look ideally for a B or a private to be able to close on something for the first and the second. Loan to value, again, is determined by the purchase price or the appraisal value. I cannot emphasize that enough. That will be in every single slide. Usually 2 to 5% of fees are charged for the second. There's a much larger premium on the rate for the second. And then we can go actually up to 85% if we were to add a first and a second for a client. It is very costly. So this is an option that if we can avoid, we will. But again, if client is doing it out of need or that it will be profitable for them in the end, then we will put this together. So I just wanted to show you guys again an example. So we have a full purchase price of 800,000. The original purchase price was 750. So there's that $50,000 lift. My first lender will go to 80% of that 750. So we'll take it to 600. We got a second mortgage, so we'll take it to 85%, which is 80,000. So the total borrowing is 680. So in this example, you can actually borrow again more than that 80% loan to value, take it up to 85%. But with the fees involved, it does cost quite a bit more. We're paying 2 sets of legal fees. We're paying 2 sets of finder's fees and broker fees on these files. So it will add up to quite a bit for the client.
So just a quick comment too. This is just to close on the property. So if somebody wants to charge you, say 20% interest annually, who cares if you have a plan to switch it over into an A lender rate after at full value. So if you talk to Diana about your strategy, about what you're trying to get by, it's like, we just need to close on this property in whatever creative way we can. I don't care about the interest rate because I want to refinance it with an A lender rate afterwards. Diana would have to find a lender that you could do that quicker.
Yeah,
but
and I
have
talk
faith
about
in her.
that in one of the slides.
Yeah, but so these astronomical things that may seem crazy, it's short term.
It is
can be
short-term.
short term if you plan for it.
Yeah, and that's the whole thing. Like, it just depends on what your intent is with the property. Are you buying it out of need, and are you buying it, or are you buying it because you know that there's potential to make money afterwards? I never like to put anybody into a position like this unless we absolutely have to, or we have a really solid plan as to how to get out of it. So like that first and a second is really just to get into the property, but we have to have an exit strategy in place if I'm going to suggest putting you into something like this. And the next slide. Okay, so, and then the other option is a first mortgage with a cash injection. So I've gone to all my lenders and everyone's saying, no, it's not appraising out. We don't like the lift. We don't like the client. You know, they're going to have to come up with the difference. So very simple. We're going to go with a purchase price of 800,000. The original purchase price was 750. Okay, so my minimum down payment is going to be 50,000 because of that 750. I'm short 50,000, so I need a cash injection at $50,000. Right? Does that make sense? So basically, what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to tell my client, you're going to have to up your down payment by an extra 50,000, and that can come from their own cash savings, or that can come from leveraging another property that they own. So if you own your own principal residence and this is being bought as a rental, we're going to refinance or take out a line of credit. That's actually my next slide. To do that, we can switch, go to the next slide. So just going to talk about leveraging. So leveraging to finance the lift. So what you can do is yeah, you're going to take either your principal residence, another rental that you may have, or again, you may reach out to family or friends, whatever it may be, and then you can just refinance, utilize a line of credit. All right. And then despite the rates going up, being able to fully finance a good project will get you further quicker. So I always tell people, like, if you have the ability to take out equity out of another property, do that instead of using your own cash. As long as the cash that you have, you're going to do something to make money with it, do another project, do a flip, whatever it may be. But I always find that with my clients, the ones that leverage the most are the ones that are able to go from 1 to 2 to 10 properties the fastest. And then the exit strategy, so that's my last slide. So how to recoup your funds. So you want to be able to pay yourself back, whether it's you've gotten that first and a second, or you've leveraged, or have used your own cash or mom and dad's cash. Okay, so if you've had to use cash or credit to obtain a second to finance the subject property on assignment, depending on the market conditions, you can refinance that property. Generally, it's 6 months to a year later. That was the general rule, I would say, 6 months ago, when the market just kept going up and up before we kind of hit that plateau, we call it. That was the general rule of the lenders. Unless there is reason, like again, they've bought something under market, they want to be able to pay themselves back, they've done some work in the property, we can see if we can do a refinance much sooner than that. then you can get yourself into an A mortgage or with a chartered bank as long as the clients qualify. So that's ideally what we would take you guys through. If we can't go with option 1 or 2, we would either stack the mortgage or come in with a cash injection and then get you refinanced out to, you know, an A lender as soon as possible.
The cheapest, the most effective way, correct me if I'm wrong, is to purchase this property with an A lender, get the most funds that they will give you, with an understanding that your lender is going to refinance it from 6 months to a year, and usually it's back at mom and dad or a friend. That is the easiest, smoothest process to have this done.
Or if we can get it all done in one shot, like if the lift can be financed up to 95% with an A bank, that's obviously the most ideal, and it does happen, but it, again, case by case basis.
But if the deal is amazing, you got to pay to play, and it's
Yeah.
going to cost you fees.
And that's just the cost of doing business.
Anybody have any finance questions for Diana?
Is it really realistic to get an assignment deal with the 9:5 ratio? Like seeing the deposits have to be paid back plus the lift on closing. Like, I'm already in the deal for more than 5.
But we're financing lift, right? We're gonna go up to, I just want to use 500,000 just as an example. So say like 500,000 is the new purchase price, including the lift. We can finance up to 95% of that. If a client makes a deposit in trust to the lawyer, or they're, you know, going to reimburse the assignor for their deposits, that really has nothing to do with me, because on closing, if they want that money back, they're getting that back. It has nothing to do with me if I'm willing to finance up to 95% of that. So yeah, we can, if it's a $500,000 purchase, we'll go up to 95%, even if you've given 100,000 in deposits. Doesn't matter to me. I don't care what you've given in deposit. I see like you're like. Yeah, that's what I generally would advise. So again, case per case basis, we would take a look at what's going on in the market. If they're like, okay, you know what, we're kind of sitting stagnant, or prices might be going down a little bit. So let's put you into a 1-year term or whatever, and then we'll exit out at that time. So again, we'll have to pre-plan the exit strategy, but generally, yes, I would put somebody into a variable if we wanted to do it quickly. We have to keep in mind that with option 3, or even 2, a lot of the B lenders don't give a variable option. So we have to go with a short term and go with a 1 year, see if they'll offer a 6 month. So again, it depends on who we're going with originally, and then we'll plan out the exit strategy from there and figure out which product is best for them. Yeah, especially the opens, like we're gonna go totally open. They'll charge a big fee up front because they know that that's really the only place that they'll make their money. So yeah, but again, if you're not going to have it for very long, it doesn't really matter. If you're just going to hold on to it for like 2 to 3 months, the rate is not going to be your biggest cost, right?
Okay, thank you, Diana.
Thanks.
So show of hands, Q4 of last year, Q1 of this year, who was banging their heads against the wall trying to find their clients' properties? Losing your mind, 28 offers, and you're just one of them. You're telling your people that they have a 3% chance, but you're a great realtor, it's 5, right? Super hard. How many of you guys would have loved to have said to your clients, come work with me as your buyer's agent, I have access to off-market properties, right? Whenever I personally say that to anything, their eyes light up. What do you mean? How do you have this awesome network that people are just coming to you with off-market? Why wouldn't they go to market to get market value for these properties? Well, I was sitting back on a beach while you guys were struggling, because I had lots of these properties. Let me introduce you to Don and Rick from Lewis Brothers. They're our wholesalers. They have a brief presentation here, the chat, and probably a ton of Q&A afterwards.
Probably more Q&A than anything.
So I just want to thank you guys for coming out. It's such a pleasure to meet you. And we have a picture. We're going to get you guys involved a little bit here. So how many of you have bought and sold a house that looks like this?
Should be everybody.
You sold that one. Okay, so next picture. So then you get your grandma's kitchen, kind of original condition from the 60s, let's say. I'm sure most of you guys have sold and bought these. Okay. And then how about this? Yeah. See, I like that reaction.
Go back one, go back one.
So then you can go back and side.
So one more then.
Forward, there's a delay with it. One more.
One more?
Yeah.
So this is what we market for. This is what we look to buy. These are very hard to finance through the bank. So this is the stuff that we spend $25,000 a month in advertising to find these types of houses.
These aren't even worth it.
Yeah, this is actually pretty tame. So I'm going to tell you a little story about this house, which can describe our basic seller. So if you want to go for it. So don't be too shocked by the video. You can't smell it.
I feel like I
So Dave owned this house. He'd been living, that's his bedroom. He was 65 years old. He had been living in here since his parents owned the house. They passed away, and he had no ability or know-how how to transfer from when they passed away into his name. So when we met him, we had to help him go through with the lawyers, transfer over to his name. We helped him with housing as well. Like, he didn't have running water in his bathtub. He was washing himself in the sink. So we actually what we did is we came in, we worked for about 6 months with him, and we were able to help him and put him in a situation where he's happy. He called me the day that we closed and said, I just took a shower for the first time in like 6 years. And he was so happy, and he's in such a good place now. But this is basically what we do. This is what we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And that's pretty much how these houses work, Chris.
Yeah, so there's lots of things that this sort of seller needs help with. It's obviously, this is not market ready. This is not going to be able to sell quickly. You have to come cash or private financing for this. The lenders probably won't touch this. And there's always a lot of background work that has to be done with these sort of deals. So this is what we advertise for primarily.
It's a lot of help and holding hands and making sure that they end up on a better end at the end of it, because he didn't know what to do with this. So this is what we do as a company, is help them out, give them a good price, and really show them how the whole process is going to work.
Does this sort of thing scare anybody in there? For their buyers?
What was the question?
Does it scare anybody in the room to present to a buyer? No?
There was a rash in this basement. You had to keep your mouth closed or you would ingest glass. Like, it was just nasty. The key point of this thing is it's impossible to trust me on this, get lenders. So somebody has
It
to come
is.
in with cash, period. Which therefore eliminates 99% of the buyer.
Well, only if it's a private, sorry. You go ahead.
Private follows confidence and success.
In history.
So if you try to do private your first time, you may hit your head against the wall. Once you start to do private, it grows confidence within the private, and they will start to not lend to the private, but to lend to the process and short track record.
Can I just add to that? So when you're asking private, like for me and the privates that I have access to on the system and not just individuals that we know, no, they won't, a private won't finance a project like this because they're so about the property. And if they have to foreclose and the marketability of that property, they don't want this. They don't want this on their hands. They don't want to have to take care of it. So like a MIC or a private lender, an actual lender and lending company won't do it. But again, like what Stephen was saying, if it's a person, they're going to start lending to you as the borrower over the project itself, right? So in my world, this would be very hard for you to have a buyer and just be like, you know, we'll try to get them private financing unless we have somebody in mind. No, this is not something we'll do.
Appraisal, report, intent, budget, estimates from your contractors, everything.
Holdbacks, yeah.
Holdbacks, absolutely everything to try to get that done. But when you have your private relations, it is a 5 to 6 minute phone call. So
If it's something that interests you working with these types of projects, you really have to build relationships.
Next slide, please.
So pretty much, just want to give you a recap. Those are the primary houses that we buy. But we do get other deals that are not slightly as bad as that. But pretty much our mission as private home buyers is pretty much to help the homeowner because they want a guaranteed way to save money and time. So typically scenarios like this, they're looking for more than just the sale of a home. They're looking for a lot more than just that. And pretty much we purchased over 50 homes in the last couple of years.
So essentially what I was saying earlier, like we spend $25,000 a month. What happens with that 25 grand a month in advertising is we get a lot of overflow that fits into the first slide we showed you and the second slide we showed you guys, which is where we want to try and create a connection with realtors and their buyers, because those are not houses that we're going to put under contract because we want to flip them. We want to turn them into duplexes or whatever it may be. So we're trying to bridge a gap and figure out how we can work together and get you guys, the buyers, in front of these off-market deals that are already negotiated very well.
Has anybody here worked with a wholesaler before? Okay, we'll get to that.
Yeah. So sorry for this. This is really exactly what you end up seeing. These are the conditions that we run into. This is another house. It's hard to see sometimes, but then you end up being able to help somebody in the end. It really becomes worth it.
But this is typically what wholesalers deal with. We deal with all types of scenarios all day long. But what we want to be able to do is we get the leads for the first photo and the second photo. And what we want to be able to do is they usually have a reason why they're calling us. And that's what we're trying to solve, is because maybe they don't want to use a realtor, or they just want a quick transaction or whatever. But we want to be able to take these opportunities. They may not work for our scenario and for what we do with projects. And hopefully maybe you guys have buyers that would want to use have these properties as well.
So under 25,000 that you spend in a month, how many calls is that?
We're on average about 3 to 4 calls a day. And that's through online, that's through, we do like, I think it was like, we're up to 700,000 flyers we put out this year. Yeah. So we're just like, that's where a lot of money goes into marketing to get in front of these people.
I'm missing the point here on this slide. So obviously the one on the right hand side is what you look at the park. What's the two?
We get calls for the first one and the second one.
Yeah.
Oh,
So there's a reason, they're calling us for a reason, because they don't want to sell on market, they want a quick sale.
oh.
They're looking, but
And would you take those?
if we could have buyers on the other end that people understand that are okay to pay an assignment fee and they're still looking for some sort of project, that's what we're trying to create here.
So your business is to live. Right? So you're gonna find it, you're gonna hope stand and say, they're buying home. And then you're gonna live on these ones, but these ones you're gonna keep it flat.
Generally,
Depends,
it depends, yeah. Depends on what the buyers are looking like.
The bottom line is they're after 1% or 1% of the market. Believe it or not, in this room, there's a couple people that hate realtors, right? They hate realtors, they get paid too much. Sometimes they have personality disorders where they don't want, or they can't mentally cope with anybody going through their home. If somebody says, we can buy your home, like sight unseen sometimes, or with one visit, these people jump at that opportunity. So there's always these unique situations that gravitate to wholesalers in this situation. Once they're under contract, they will go through to a full virtual walkthrough, video, everything. Quite often they have to assign them sight unseen. Okay, so you need to be prepared to do that, but your buyer gets to buy under market value. And in Q4 of last year, Q1 of this year, with no bidding wars, time to think about it, time for solicitor review, and get into this property under market value. Lewis Braddock had no problem with me dropping his name. He called these guys up. They had a property. It was almost turnkey. They needed $5K in work on Granby Street North. Lewis bought it for his own portfolio. He got it $100K under market value. So they have opportunities. They're not always 100K, depending on when it gets put under contract and what's happening with the market. Like last year it was gangbusters, so it's going up. Right now you have to be really cautious. So there is opportunity. Lindsay Smith didn't mind me dropping his name either. Lindsay Smith had one on the right, deplorable condition with Spencer. I'm sorry. And he said, can you guys come have a look at it? I don't think I can go to market with this. The sellers don't want anybody through their house. They're running through some rough times and whatnot. Guys went over, put in an offer right on the spot. And quite often what they'll do is they're not typical realtors. These guys in their offer will lend them 20K the next day. Literally a bank draft within the offer. So these people that can't even make their mortgage payments, they don't even have first and last for the next. They're running into legal problems. They're having trouble moving, whatever it is. They go in with a problem-solving hat that most realtors are a little nervous to do. Like right now, we're nervous staging a home, right? These guys will go in and lend 20K. Put it right in the agreement, everything, it gets paid back on closing costs to the lawyer, but they constantly wear a significantly greater creative cap than most realtors do.
We're starting to advertise into that space, but for the past 3 years, we've been concentrating on just single family homes and duplexes.
Suzanne.
I'm gonna ask my question now.
Okay. So quite often what these guys are wanted to come and speak today to you guys about is quite often they do have properties that don't meet the avatar that they're looking to work with and do construction on. They're still under market value. They need to put them out there. They don't want to go to MLS. So the idea is you can run your own comps. Maybe there's an opportunity out there. The total cost of this project is $600,000. You run your comps and you're like, hey, this is $680 everywhere for this property, Mr. Seller. You want to go in. The only thing, these guys will cooperate with real estate agents with their commissions, but you do have to add it on top of that. So if you're looking for 25K, you're gonna tell your client this property is 625. And that's what it will get transacted at, and then you will get reimbursed on closing. So you do have to add your real estate fee on top of it, but it will still be under market value.
So, no, I'm not.
There's hundreds of wholesalers all across Ontario. The irony is they are professionals now. They're no longer that call the guy and he shows up with his brother and they offer you a crappy offer. The lead wholesaler in all of Canada is a real estate lawyer. Actually, he went to school with a guy in your office.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, they went to school together. So it's kind of changed faces that they're trying to find this 1% and 1% of the deals. They become off-market properties that your clients could have access to. So basically, at the end of this presentation, you guys need to literally Google wholesalers and get added on to everybody's email list. It's just like their own little drip. They'll put it down, picture of the property, where it is. They won't tell you the street address, but they'll tell you the general location. Pictures right up, they'll even do their own comps, these people, and send them to you. You'll have a constant feed of off-market properties that you can now market as buyer services to your clients.
And there's usually 95% of the time, there's usually something that needs to be addressed with the property.
Yeah.
That's usually not a very, very easy thing. Yeah.
So. Are you guys seeing more or less opportunities on your end now that it's become a bit more difficult to sell? Or maybe this is probably increased the number of calls that you guys are getting.
We're getting a lot of calls of places that are on market, not selling. We're getting a lot of calls from pretty much anybody looking to do anything. But if they don't fit our avatar, they don't work, we can't work with it.
Okay, and so what do you guys do with those? Are you like letting real estate agents that you work with those there are people that are sort of looking?
Immediately, if they're not under contract to somebody else, we will refer them over and give them a real estate agent's information so they can contact and work with them directly.
But you need to create relationships with wholesalers and you start working, and that's where it comes from. Hundreds of these guys across Ontario have websites that are legit. Believe it or not, they transact a lot of deals a year. some of them hundreds, like high hundreds sort of thing. Build relationships, hopefully get a deal done with the client, continue on with that.
These properties that will figure
Yeah.
Is the buyer of the building working?
Yeah, so no, typically we'll be putting it under contract and doing everything that we discussed with the assignment fees. And so we'll sell basically the contract.
So that picture. On the way, you buy, you're gonna invest in it, you're gonna flip it.
Yeah.
The middle left, you are putting under contract and to the side.
Yes.
Sometimes depending on the deal, depending on how quick they need to leave, because as I said, these guys probably react super quick. We're talking 4 days in the lawyer's trust account. So they can get people moving super quick. But you need to have somebody willing to purchase that property. So they need to develop relationships to find out exactly what people need to put in these offers. If it's a high risk thing, they may need to put a 2-week conditional period, put it under contract, market it to the masses, and you're still protected in the conditional period. But if it's high risk place, you gotta drop that condition. If it's a slam dunk, and you know you have a buyer, you're confident, have the relationships with the realtor, they will work firm in order to get the best price.
Because most of the time they're looking for that guaranteed sale, especially times right now that they don't know if the house can sell or not. They want that guaranteed sale.
Are these two types of properties, the specialist properties, like, are they allowing walkthroughs? So there's usually not an address.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like, hey guys, I got some, they love the pictures, comps make sense. Can I bring them in?
So we would have a conversation first to explain the property, we have videos, photos, all that sort of stuff, and then we see how far we get into it. And depending on the deal, if the seller doesn't want walkthroughs, there's obviously a discount on that property because of that. So if they allow walkthroughs, we may coordinate one walkthrough for a couple of people, but that's up to the seller at that point, because they're looking for that confidentiality.
What I recommend, same thing with Lewis product. I say, get your client 95%. They know the area, they know the house, they know the age of the house, they did the drive-by, they're pre-approved. Get your client 95% of the way there, that unless they find some material issues with the house that was not disclosed, you know it's almost a slam dunk. You can do that. Sometimes you can get showings, but they are limited because the original ABS would be group showings. They would have to negotiate with the client and say, hey, I got a few people from real estate like to come through, and basically go block off like an hour to try to get everybody through that they can. But you need to get your people.
95%.
Are you interested in wholesale? How's the lender? How's your lender gonna lend on? Oh, okay, so lender, if I bring you a wholesale opportunity like this, can you work with that? Yes, I can. Okay, wholesalers, have somebody that's ready to go. You get 95% of the way there. You want to make it faster. It's not MLS, place whatever you want.
And the other thing that we have too is we came from the construction industry, we still run a construction company, but we were in construction for 12 years. So we can tell you exactly what has to go in the house. So that's our other advantage on that side.
Yeah, we're in Durham region, York region, and Simcoe right now. And we're specifically heavily based in those three areas.
There's a little fire that the like softens.
Mhm.
Those are wholesalers.
Yeah.
Those are wholesalers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No response, like these guys in the van. Something and then the industry changed, like it's 2021, there's no houses. Like, you guys call it any of the realtors, like let's be honest, right? In 2021, the realtors were like, come, we need you, that's what you got, and the realtors love them, and they stop.
Especially during COVID, because nobody wanted to be close to their houses.
Yeah.
So they're always calling us.
Not in our portfolio, but I mean, we'll buy anything, like whatever's, if it shows up as a deal. Yeah, yeah, we did
We don't
Balsam,
market too much.
Balsam Lake once.
Yeah.
We got a couple calls.
You
like
got
that.
that lead, for,
Oh, yeah.
Another thing.
Yeah.
Like the top people doing this do it sight unseen mostly, like across Canada. There's some people that buy out of Ontario.
So I just want to make sure I got this loop completed, because I feel like I got a little bit of a gap here. So you get a lead, you get a good product, and you get a check product. You get a good product, you buy it on assignment, you buy it with the purposes of doing an assignment.
Yeah.
You advertise it to.
Realtors like you, yeah.
Realtors. Get the assignment, then the deal closes. Okay. You get a ship product, okay, so picture on the right, you buy it,
We may assign it, or we may take it and flip it.
okay.
Yeah.
So all three of these could be through assignment.
Yeah.
In the event that it's not an assignment, you buy it, you invest it, you buy it from the person with mental health issues, and then you flip it,
Yes.
and then you still sell it probably through your wholesale, and never hits MLS then?
No,
It gets
once-
offered to,
Sorry.
it gets offered to the group, and then it would go to MLS to their
What do you
favorite.
talk to that group? What's the group?
They would go to a list, to their email list, to the direct.
Oh, so you can still sell, try and sell it off market.
Because you never know, you may have a client that wants to buy it where they can save still market value.
Why would you sell a good product off market when you can increase the return that you got?
So let's just say this good product has a week to close.
No, she's thinking after it's
Yeah,
split.
when it's done.
So you bought something.
Oh,
Yeah.
So Mr. Smith is now happily in with the site, and you own the product.
Yeah.
You flip it. So now you're on site. Why would you sell it wholesale, not on?
they don't sell it wholesale, it gets sold retail. So it would primarily go to MLS, but if we knew Suzanne Mills was looking for that house and there was a conversation about it, her client was fighting at the chops, it's an off-market opportunity that you would have. You would know it was coming.
Well, why would you give me that opportunity when you could earn $100,000?
Why do people lend these guys millions of dollars to do this? Because they have relationships that they forged.
Okay.
You're probably gonna come back
So
more
the
than
key-
once. You're gonna have another buyer wanting to buy our
And then
property.
you're getting your kind of discount. For us, it's about turnover.
It's not all about the end numbers, like you're just not specifically working for yourself, it's like crush the deal and nail it. It's a big relationship business.
If I bring your client a turnkey property and they're still buying it under market, it saves me time too. It works out.
So is it you that buys these properties, or is it people who know about these properties?
Which one's this one?
Yeah.
If we don't assign it, we buy it. So,
So the key thing too also is, if you're looking at a $700,000 retail house and they want to go off, well, they're gonna obviously figure out what their issue is, why they're not going to market, try to accommodate that, whatever costs, and hedge the risks on it, remove real estate fees, whatnot, come up with a price that they're willing to offer. And their price is 620. And this person says, well, I want at least 675 or I can't do anything. That is no longer a wholesale deal. It's too close to retail. That would then go out to their retail partners. Obviously, sorry, if it's local, it just happens to be somebody I know. But if it's not local, it goes to their other partners to say, we have a client, they're closer to retail than wholesale. We can't get a deal done with us. Can we send it to you? Right?
So if, let's say we came across that other half of the law, and we are this payroll right now. That was that situation you talked about. We didn't get you guys engaged, but still get our piece.
Yep.
of the deal.
yeah, you just put your commission on top of whatever the price is, or
So keep you guys involved in that too.
Because we'll also buy stuff too. If it's like that, we'll buy it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Sometimes you're like looking at stuff with a market.
So,
Oh, man, it's just, it looks like a good deal, but you just don't know how to work with it. And, you know, $10,000 and 8 bins later to try to even get it cleaned up. And they can't afford the bins or the cleanup and have nowhere to go, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I don't really want to front them 30 grand on this deal. I'm a little concerned. It's a wholesale opportunity.
So when you do your operator purchase to this buyer or this seller here, do you have a condition that you don't find a buyer for it?
it depends on the deal. So on this one specifically, no, we did a firm deal, but every deal is going to be dependent on what we're going to do with it afterwards. If we're going to close on it, it's going to have, we're going to be able to flip it or turn it into a rental property. So we do that due diligence before the offer goes in. If not, we stay, like, we're not going to be closed on this. We're going to try and sell it to our list. And then they understand we have usually 14 days to get an assignment.
The risk determines the parts.
Yeah.
So are you open to
You remember our discussion, you cannot take anything outside of that original contract. So that original contract has a financing clause for 2 weeks. And you have an assignment that wants to get involved in it, you would then have to work within that period, or extension or whatever. You cannot create, you're buying the rights to the original contract period.
Can you add it to your assignment?
No.
Your agreement to assignment?
No.
If you're, the schedule on there
But the schedule is between you
that.
and the assigner, or not the seller.
I know, but you could basically put your assigner.
You could go back and have the seller
Yeah.
change it then.
Yeah.
It's taking a couple steps back, it could happen. I haven't seen it yet.
And most wholesalers probably won't allow those conditions, because we've already firmed up on them, usually.
So are you gonna discuss, financing? We talked about that.
So it's challenging. Like, you told me Scotia Bank is. Oh my God, I've never had it from my life. But he said, and I don't know the details of the
I have relationship with that bank. A lot of, ifs to fall into place in order for it to be financed, but it can be, and it is that. And then if it's not done with that option, then you have all the other options that you can do.
It's really about educating your buyer on how this works before you bring it into the off-market phase. Let them be prepared, knowing you have finance for it. Because you don't want to bring somebody who doesn't understand the process in, it's just going to be way too confusing.
get on wholesalers, that's ours. But just Google them in your area, all have, most of them have websites. Some of them will, most of them will work with realtors, some of them will even say 3%, things like that. But you can negotiate normally depending on the deal to your client. So you're usually free to negotiate. So if you feel it's a 10K or 2.5, or it's a rock star, you can negotiate 3.5, whatever you feel your value is. It's your client. Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Guys.